a vast subject and takes a long time, but then this is a short meeting. So I will come to the characteristic that so annoys the enemies of the whites. Why is it that the globalists and the supremacists want to wipe out whites? They don't want to wipe out Mongolians, they don't want to wipe out Vietnamese, they don't have thousands of movies depicting the Malaysians as a worthless people, as a cowardly people. They don't make movies that try to make the Rwandan women want to marry non-Rwandan men. But of course there are thousands of movies in which white women are incited to marry black men or brown men. Now, why is it that they target the whites? Well, one of the reasons is that, yes, whites can make good slaves. Many whites have become traitors to their race. But the other races make better slaves. The whites are an individualistic people who solve their own problems. And I'll do just a 1-minute history on that. The first civilizations were hydraulic civilizations. They relied on water. It is water that gives life, water that gives prosperity, enough surplus for a civilization. Surplus of food, basically. But then you have the time to make tools. Now, these hydraulic civilizations grew up in the Nile River, the Euphrates, the Tigris, and in India around the Indus, where the Harappa civilization grew up. The Harappa is now near to present-day Karachi. In China, the first civilizations were hydraulic, based on the great rivers. In all these civilizations, they needed cooperation to get together and build waterworks, dams, breakwaters, flood reservoirs, and they naturally gravitated to dictatorship, to kings, to pharaohs, and they became people who were dependent on the collective, dependent on the government, dependent on the king as a god. In China, they even had a saying that the nail that sticks up, gets hammered down. So everybody just bunker down, conform with the rest, say the same prayers as everybody else, and obey the same orders. And the whites, on the other hand, did not have a hydraulic civilization. They went to Europe where they found vast lands, fertile lands, not one great river, but thousands of streams, and they built farms and they lived far apart from each other at a distance, and they became independent-minded. They solved their own problems on their own farms, in their own villages. In fact, that's what led them to become self-governing. The first parliament was in Iceland. The first democratic spirit was among the Vikings, who said, we have no king. When they were confronted by the French king, they said, who is your king? They said, we have no king, but Rolf the Walker leads us on the field of battle. We just trust in him at the time. Now, this spirit, non-hydraulic, self-governing, can be seen in 1,000 little ways. The white wants to solve his own problems, whereas if you go to India, the instinct is the government must do it. Oh, we don't have enough tourists, the government must get involved. They always want authority to do it. Whereas the white doesn't want authority, his first instinct is, can I do it? And if I can't do it, can we at a ground level do it as individuals? So for example, the whites will have something like a Salvation Army or an SPCA. I was in Richmond the other day, and there was a thrift store. And this thrift store said that they're out to get money to finance their animal shelter. Now, some people, mainly women, had got together and put up this thrift store. People bring stuff, they sell it, they get a profit, they give it to the animal shelter. And no one's yelling out, government, government! I need the government to do this. You have something called Alcoholics Anonymous. People have a problem, they don't look to the government to solve it. They have their own societies and they try to solve it among themselves. Now, this spirit also extends to something like the jury system. Everywhere, in any country you go, you have a justice problem, you look to authority. There's a judge appointed by the government, and the judge is a civil servant, and he gives the decisions, whereas the whites had, from the beginning, a council system in which the people, 12 men, honest and true, would decide the fate of a legal suit, or the guilt or innocence of a person who's been charged with a crime. Now, I don't see the jury system in any other, among other ethnicities. So this inborn instinct for individuals' action, individual solution of problems, led to the whites founding the idea of a democracy. Now, today's democracy is perverted because the very foundations and prerequisites of democracy have been subverted and in fact removed. But the basic idea was there that we will solve our problems where a centralized authority is needed, we'll elect it. And this was purely born out, developed in Europe, went to America, and then exported to the whole world. This democracy has prerequisites for it. For example, there has to be a free press and a micro press where there are hundreds of thousands of organs, not these monopolies that we've come to see. Not centralization, but the opposite. Democracy requires a fragmentation of power, and that has been removed. All you have is in fact the election. That's the prerequisites of democracy have gone, the election remains, and what happens? The few that you elect are bought by the powerful who control most of the wealth. Now, this democracy, freedom cannot be protected by rule books known as constitutions. They cannot be protected by laws. Democracy springs from the minds of men. The spirit of freedom is in the instincts and the minds of people. And as I think the enemy, the intellectuals of the enemy have decided that the white gene pool is the seedbed, the soil from which the spirit of freedom springs. And from there, the institutions of freedom springs. And they have to destroy that white gene pool, that white gene forest, to do that. Now, if anyone doubts it, they need to do a little research and look at all the thousands of ways in which whites instinctively try to solve their problems at a local level. But they haven't been in charge of their countries for a long time, and centralization has been forced or directed by the enemy, and you have vast corporations where there should be millions of small companies. You have federal governments grabbing power from provincial governments, provincial or state governments grabbing power from the districts and the counties. But going back in history to a time when whites ruled their own countries, you will find they always had power at a local level and less at a national level. Centralization is sought by tyrants, by those who would like to dominate and rule and have a vision of a boot stamping on a face forever. I'm quoting from George Orwell's 1984.
Yeah.
Wherever you see a tendency to centralize, you will see the advance of tyranny and something that goes counter to the instincts and most primitive drives of the Caucasian peoples.
We don't make good slaves, so that perhaps is why the enemy wants to destroy this freedom-loving, independent-spirited people
Well,
that
people that looks.
where we come from, but we have been currently, I mean, it's not at a genetic level, we are still there, but at a, suppression level, and what they've done to us has kind of turned us into slaves right now. Many people have become so compliant, but I believe that at a genetic level, we're still there. You just have to look at little children playing, and you can see that free spirit in them. That's how I feel.
I hope so,
But anyway,
but I ask you to be conscious of the weaknesses of your people, and you do have weaknesses.
We sure do.
Today, I see American congressmen grovel like dogs. The most outrageous slavishness is present. Sometimes I wonder how a race can survive with so many traitors.
Our race does tend to have many traitors among us, which is a very big problem. But we also need to recognize that, and all our good qualities are being used as weapons against us by the enemy within.
You have to recognize that the soul that exists can be bred out. There are whites who have been on welfare for 3 generations and are perfect candidates to be slaves under a communist system. There are whites who have no culture, and after 3 generations of rule, of domination by an alien system, by a supremacist regime, they've turned into sort of very plastic people, okay? All the great qualities that required millions of generations, millions of years anyway, to develop this spirituality of the Caucasians, which I couldn't go into detail about, but it has many elements, this unique spirituality. It can be bred out in 3 generations. Now, it's a moment of great danger. I ask everybody to try and wake up their friends and tell them what will be lost if whites are bred out of existence, blended out of existence. Many wonderful things will be lost. All those whites sitting in their garages with vintage cars and lovingly restoring them, there'll be no one else to do it. All those whites who go out and build an owl refuge with their own resources, there'll be no one else to do it. When I go to Burnaby Central Park, I see these whites lovingly building these model ships, so painstakingly crafted, perfectly designed, and they sail these model ships on the pond. And they sail so well, and they take such pride in their craftsmanship, and they don't care that this doesn't bring food into their bellies. They do it out of a love of craft. There'll be nobody else to do it. We are at the 11th hour, and I urge whites to recognize, to look around themselves and recognize all these little things that make them different, and recognize the broader truth that they are a universe-oriented, outward-looking people, and possibly the only outward-looking people on the planet. We are at a very dangerous moment. You either survive now or you perish forever.